I'm going to read you an excerpt from a writer named Søren Kierkegaard. He's a Danish theologian, and he's awesome. The matter is quite simple. The Bible is very easy to understand, but we Christians are a bunch of scheming swindlers. We pretend to be able I'll repeat that. We pretend to be unable to understand it because we know very well that the minute we understand, we are obliged to act accordingly. Take any words in the New Testament and forget everything except pledging yourself to act accordingly. My God, you will say, if I do that, my whole life will be ruined. How would I ever get on in the world? I think for us, Christ the King is a bit of a scandal. Christianity is a bit of a scandal because in many ways we know exactly what it means. You think about all of the backflips and dodges that people did around the issue of refugees. Joseph and Mary were refugees, right? Jesus was the child of refugees that fled into Egypt from a tyrant, right? It's black and white, and we think about all the ways that we try to avoid it. It seems that fear is often our chief opponent. I read this quote from Gandhi. I can't quote it exactly. And to be honest, the amount of quotes about Gandhi on the internet, who knows if Gandhi actually said it. But it's we think that hate is our opponent, but it's actually fear, is the quote. We think our opponent is hate, but it's actually fear. And that really is the biggest impediment to us reaching out to people in places of conflict. Right? It's not that we hate people in Syria. It's not that we're all warriors who are in some great battle against the Syrian people. We're frightened. That's the biggest point of opposition. What if they turn out to be terrorists in disguise? And of course, it holds as much water as the Japanese people after Pearl Harbor being secretly Japanese soldiers in disguise. You don't live in a refugee camp for 2 years as a secret sleeper agent, risking your life crossing the sea and all of these things just to attack somebody. I mean, the guys that did all this stuff in Paris, they were all French nationals. They could have bought a plane ticket and flown here. Right? It's fear. So many of these things that Jesus teaches are so simple. The gospel isn't complicated, really. It's really wonderful to study, and it's really wonderful to explore. We've been doing these courses week after week, exploring the Old Testament, and a lot of things that are very confusing are coming to light, but the Bible is unequivocal that what we're really called to do is love one another as God loves us, or love our neighbors as ourselves. We know what that feels like to love. I think some of us have some deep challenges with understanding that, but for most of us, we understand what it means to love and to be loved. We understand what it means to follow God without fear. We know what that looks like, but we don't want to ruin our lives. We know what it means to be generous, and that's expensive. We know what it means to follow God, and that's frightening. And we know what it means to proclaim the gospel to people who know perfectly well what it means and know perfectly well that it's right. But it's uncomfortable sometimes to be Christian in this world. So on this Christ the King Sunday, this is not a long sermon. We all know what the gospel says. We all know what the gospel means. We all know that it's frightening. And many times we don't want to do it. And I encourage you to have courage, to have conviction, to live the life that God is calling you to live, to do the things that God is calling you to do. Don't be afraid. Follow Jesus.